and the others were brought to a speedy trial, whereof 9 were convicted and executed. Kennedy, having spent all his money, came over from Ireland and kept a public house on Deptford Road, and now and then, it was thought, made an excursion abroad in the way of his former profession, till one of his household gave information against him for a robbery, for which he was committed to Bridewell, but because she would not do the business by halves, she found out a mate of a ship that Kennedy had committed piracy upon, as he foolishly confessed to her. This mate, whose name was Grant, paid Kennedy a visit in Bridewell, and knowing him to be the man, procured a warrant, and had him committed to the Marshalsea prison. The game that Kennedy had now to play was to turn evidence himself. Accordingly he gave a list of 8 or 10 of his comrades, but not being acquainted with their habitations, only one was taken, who, though condemned, appeared to be a man of fair character, was forced into their service, and took the first opportunity to get from them, and therefore received a pardon. But Walter Kennedy, being a notorious offender, was executed July 19, 1721, at Execution Dock. The rest of the pirates, who were left in the ship Rover, stayed not long behind, for they went ashore to one of the West India Islands. What became of them afterwards I cannot tell, for their ship was found at sea by a sloop belonging to St. Christopher's, and carried into that island, with only 9 negroes aboard. Thus we see what a disastrous fate ever attends the wicked, and how rarely they escape the punishment due to their crimes, who, abandoned to such a profligate life, rob, spoil, and prey upon mankind, contrary to the light and law of nature, as well as the law of God. It might have been hoped that the examples of these deaths would have been as marks to the remainder of the gang, how to shun the rocks their companions had split on, that they would have surrendered to mercy, or divided themselves for ever from such pursuits, as in the end they might be sure would subject them to the same law and punishment, which they must be conscious they now equally deserved, impending law which never let them sleep well unless drunk. But all the use that was made of it here was to commend the justice of the court that had condemned Kennedy, for he was a sad dog, they said, and deserved the fate he met with. But to go back to Roberts, who we left on the coast of Cayana in a grievous passion at what Kennedy and the crew had done, and who was now projecting new adventures with his small company in the sloop, but finding hitherto that they had been but as a rope of sand, they formed a set of articles to be signed and sworn to for the better conservation of their society, and doing justice to one another, excluding all Irishmen of the benefit of it, to whom they had an implacable aversion upon the account of Kennedy. How indeed Roberts could think an oath would be obligatory where defiance had been given to the laws of God and man, I cannot tell, but he thought their greatest security lay in this, that it was every one's interest to observe them, if they minded to keep up so abominable a combination. The following is the substance of the articles, as taken from the pirates' own informations. 1. Every man has a vote in affairs of moment, has equal title to the fresh provisions or strong liquors at any time seized, and may use them at pleasure, unless a scarcity, no uncommon thing among them, make it necessary for the good of all to vote a retrenchment. 2. Every man to be called fairly in turn by list on board of prizes, because, over and above their proper share, they were on these occasions allowed a shift of clothes. But if they defrauded the company to the value of $1, in plate, jewels, or money, marooning was their punishment. This was a barbarous custom of putting the offender on shore, on some desolate or uninhabited cape or island, with a gun, a few shot, a bottle of water, a bottle of powder, to subsist or starve. If the robbery was only between one another, they contented themselves with slitting the ears and nose of him that was guilty, and set him on shore, not in an uninhabited place, but somewhere where he was sure to encounter hardships. 3. No person to game at cards or dice for money. 4. The lights and candles to be put out at 8 o'clock at night. If any of the crew after that hour still remained inclined to drinking, they were to do it on the open deck, which, Roberts believed, would give a check to their debauches, for he was a sober man himself, but found at length that all his endeavours to put an end to this debauch proved ineffectual. 5. To keep their piece, pistols, and cutlass clean and fit for service. In this they were extravagantly nice, endeavouring to outdo one another in the beauty and richness of their arms, giving sometimes at an auction, at the mast, 30 or 40 pounds a pair for pistols. They were slung, in time of service, with different coloured ribbons over their shoulders, in a way peculiar to these fellows, in which they took great delight. 6. No boy or woman to be allowed amongst them. If any man were found to be seducing any of the latter sex, and carried her to sea disguised, he was to suffer death; so that when any fell into their hands, as chanced in the Onslow, they put a sentinel immediately over her to prevent ill consequences from so dangerous an instrument of division and quarrel. But then, here lies the roguery, they contend who shall be the sentinel, which happens generally to be one of the greatest bullies. 7. To desert the ship or their quarters in battle was punished with death or marooning. 8. No striking one another on board, but every man's quarrel to be ended on shore at sword and pistol. Thus the quartermaster of the ship, when the parties will not come to any reconciliation, accompanies them on shore with what assistance he thinks proper, and turns the disputants back to back at so many paces distance. At the word of command they turn and fire immediately, or else the piece is knocked out of their hands. If both miss, they come at their cutlasses, and then he is declared victor who draws the first blood. 9. No man to talk of breaking up their way of living, till each had shared 1,000 pounds. If, in order to this, any man should lose a limb, or become a cripple in their service, he was to have $800 out of the public stock, and for lesser hurts, proportionably. 10. The captain and quartermaster to receive 2 shares of a prize, the master, boatswain, and gunner 1 share and a half, the other officers 1 1/4. 11. The musicians to have rest on the Sabbath day, but the other 6 days and nights none without special favour. These, we are assured, were some of Roberts' articles, but as they had taken care to throw overboard the original they had signed and sworn to, there is a great deal of room to suspect the latter contained something too horrid to be disclosed to any, except such as were willing to be sharers in the iniquity of them. Let them be what they will, they were together the test of all newcomers, who were initiated by an oath taken on a Bible, reserved for that purpose only, and were subscribed in presence of the worshipful Mr. Roberts. And in case any doubt should arise concerning the construction of these laws, and it should remain a dispute whether the party had infringed them or no, a jury was appointed to explain them, and to bring a verdict upon the case in doubt. Since we are now speaking of the laws of this company, I shall go on, and, in as brief a manner as I can, relate the principal customs and government of this roguish commonwealth, which are pretty near the same with all pirates. For the punishment of small offences which are not provided for by the articles, and which are not of consequence enough to be left to a jury, there is a principal officer among the pirates, called the quartermaster, of the men's own choosing, who claims all authority this way, excepting in time of battle. If they disobey his command, are quarrelsome and mutinous with one another, misuse prisoners, plunder beyond his order, and in particular, if they be negligent of their arms, which he musters at discretion, he punishes at his own arbitrament, with drubbing or whipping, which no one else dare do without incurring the lash from all the ship's company. In short, this officer is trustee for the whole, is the first person on board any prize, separating for the company's use what he pleases, and returning what he thinks fit to the owners, excepting gold and silver, which they have voted not returnable. After a description of the quartermaster and his duty, who acts as a sort of civil magistrate on board a pirate ship, I shall consider their military officer, the captain, what privileges he exerts in such